There was the organization that's now known as the March of Dimes that galvanized public support and the resources that actually created the lab. Based on his own journey, taking this into question, Dr. Collins from the organization
Let's begin at the beginning, so to speak. Is this election over, and has there been any precedent for this kind of behavior from the loser of a presidential election in certainly in modern American history?
In many ways, the election is over. Certainly the voting is over. And there are a few places there's some counting that still continues. The official conclusion of the election takes place in the United States with the counting of the Electoral College ballots and the certification of those ballots. So we still have a few weeks ahead of us in that regard. And those Electoral College ballots are to follow the votes that took place in the states. So we should know the outcome based on what happened in the 50 states. At the same time, we know that there are flashpoints that could occur. There could be what we call faithless electors and members of the Electoral College that don't vote in the direction of their state. That's highly unusual, but it certainly could happen. There's some concern that President Trump could encourage that kind of activity or some mischief to take place in the states. But if things go to course, the election is over, the Electoral College ballots will be cast, and Joe Biden will, as we anticipate, be inaugurated on January the 20th.
But just to say with this for a little while, we've seen top Republican officials, members of the cabinet, like Mr. Pompeo, Mr. McConnell, they seem to be going along with Mr. Trump for now. Is that, do you think, just giving him a little time to accept the inevitable, or is it more concerning than that? Is it about catering to the grievances of a large number of Republican voters? What is it about?
Right. I mean, those are all great questions. I think most of us believe that they are giving President Trump an opportunity to exercise his grievances in some ways. He's got litigation that's being filed in some of the states. It's not supported. It's not supportable. And in fact, cases go in and they're quickly being dismissed because there are no facts to support his claims. And perhaps once he runs through that process, they'll determine that this is over and help him understand that he will be leaving office on January 20th at 12:01 p.m. At the same time, there are some concerns that there are other things afoot. For example, we have a runoff election, or actually two, that will be taking place in the state of Georgia. There are two Senate races that are too close to call, so there will be runoffs. This could be an attempt to try and keep Republican voters attuned to this election, feeling aggrieved, and to try and generate higher turnout in the state of Georgia, because all eyes of the nation will certainly turn to Georgia, or have started to turn to Georgia. And I think there are also some concerns that this is an attempt to undermine the government that Joe Biden will take over. That being said, President-elect Biden has said to the American people, remain calm, this will run its course, and the inauguration will take place, and I will take the oath of office. We also know that President Biden, I'm used to that from the Obama administration, but President-elect Biden has many years of government experience, not only as a senator, but also as the vice president for 8 years. And he's surrounded by people who know the federal government quite well, many of them who were there as recently as 4 years ago. So they're to still work their way through this transition, though not as it should be, at least at this moment, they still are armed with quite a bit of capability and recent memory.
The Senate runoffs you mentioned are I believe, in January. There is a transition that has to happen, and that should have started, the day before yesterday.
Right.
And you have said yourself it's a very complicated process. How concerned are you about that? About the lack of cooperation from the Trump White House? Is it hope that even if the man himself continues to be uncooperative, people at lower rungs will cooperate? Because otherwise we're talking about a real crisis, no?
Well, you're exactly right. There are certain things that should have happened. And with the exception of the election in 2000, that there were real claims about what had happened in the state of Florida. After every other election, within a day or two, either the president, like President Obama, who had held his 2 terms, welcomed President-elect Trump to the White House and signed a statement that allowed for the signing of a statement that allowed funds to flow to a transition and for that process to begin. The person who has to sign that document, they have to do what we call ascertain, that the election has been concluded and that the transition should begin, is the person who's the administrator of the General Services Administration. And as of yet, she has not signed that document. That prevents a lot of things from happening. That means that resources aren't going to the Biden transition. That means that a security clearance process that would allow security clearances, the process to begin so people could start to receive security clearances, that hasn't happened yet. Office space that the Biden transition should get, they haven't received. Communications, IT support, those kinds of things haven't happened. And very importantly, what we call agency review teams, these teams of experts that are then welcomed into departments and agencies so that they can begin to look around to understand what's happening there, personnel, litigation, regulatory matters, that hasn't started as of yet either. Now, all of that being said, because of the expertise, because of the experience that sits with the Biden transition and with the president-elect himself, as well as the vice president-elect, there are people who often were there just 4 years ago, or people who have been in government for a very long time who understand those departments and agencies. They know these issues. So I think anticipating that this may be a problem, they were prepared for it and they're already beginning their work.
What about, this is about the internal workings and the transition of executive power in the US. But from the point of view of the international stage, as I mentioned earlier, the Secretary of State talked about a transition to a second Trump administration. I saw that former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe of NATO, Admiral Stavridis, has been tweeting with great concern about the changes at the Defense Department and saying that he's very anxious about them. Should we be worried about these things? Us and the rest of the world, about what may go astray in the 2.5 months of the transition?
Well, I think not. We're obviously all watching what's underway and the changes at the Defense Department, at NSA. But at the same time, for literally hundreds of years, over the course of 45 different presidents, this kind of transition has taken place. The United States prides itself in the peaceful transition of power. And even though there's angst, even though there's recalcitrance, even though we're watching what at best I would call bad behavior right now, ultimately that is a hallmark of the United States. And I believe we'll start to hear from more Republicans like Senator Mitt Romney, who was a presidential candidate himself. And others, Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, and members of the House of Representatives, who have said the election has taken place, the people have spoken, it's time for the transition to begin. And in fact, former President George W. Bush issued such a statement as well. I believe that ultimately the country will prevail over party and that people will act responsibly, because this is foundational to American democracy. It is obviously the understatement, right? Suboptimal and concerning and deeply, deeply disturbing that the current president would act this way and not allow those who work for him to allow the transition to move forward. But I ultimately believe that because this is so important to Americans and to American democracy, that we'll be able to move forward.
Now, let me ask you about the president-elect, and especially what was your special focus when you were in the White House, domestic policy. What should he be focusing on as a top priority when he comes in? Should he expect any support, or should he expect the same kind of obstructionism that you faced from the Republicans? And how hard will it be to also manage the left wing of his own party, which is coming in with a lot of demands and a lot of, shall we say, enthusiasm?
At the very, very top of the list is the COVID-19 pandemic. It represents a double threat, maybe triple threat, to not only the United States, but also to the rest of the world, because we live in a global community. So first of all, there are the health consequences to literally millions of Americans, and that has to be brought under control. Secondly, the effect on the United States economy and the ability to have the economy fully open without concerns about the continued spread of the virus. This will all be made much, much easier when the vaccine is deployed, and we've all received good news about that just a few days ago. But this is a top priority for the president-elect. Things as simple as wearing a mask. I mean, the scientists have told us this not only protects others, it protects you. And the president-elect has made very strong statements since his election became a known thing that this is something that has to happen. He's appointed a COVID-19 task force that's comprised of scientists and those who have the data necessary to help us make good decisions. In addition to that, he'll be working very hard to stabilize the economy. Dealing with COVID-19 will help that. But even before COVID-19, while many were doing well, while the markets may have been doing quite well, we know that those in the middle class and certainly those who are poor were struggling. So job creation and his plans to address that issue. Just yesterday, or November the 10th, there was an argument before the Supreme Court about the Affordable Care Act, about Obamacare. There's the possibility that it could be struck down as unconstitutional. Listening to the arguments that were made, I think that's probably unlikely. But preparing for that and adhering to campaign promises. President-elect Biden talked about expanding upon or building upon the Affordable Care Act. And then there are so many other issues, in addition to issues of racial injustice in the United States, but issues that are highly important, I would imagine, to your audience and to the rest of the world. Re-entry into the Paris Climate Agreement, re-entry into the World Health Organization. Vice President Biden, doing that, President-elect Biden is someone, because of his service not only on the Senate Judiciary Committee, but also his service on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, understands the globe. He understands and has worked with global leaders, and he understands that America's alliances in the world are vitally important, and those relationships have to be repaired and restored.
There's a lot of obviously excitement and goodwill generated by the exit of Donald Trump. Let's not kid ourselves. And there's a lot of discussion here in Brussels now about which areas of transatlantic relations the EU and the US need to focus on now to rebuild on that goodwill. Are there particular areas where you think early on the Biden administration and the EU should focus on to sort of produce some meaningful good and to show the significance of the transatlantic alliance?
My husband was born in the United States, but grew up in Canada, also has Canadian passport. So talking to my family that lives in Canada, I have some sense of the way that the eyes of the rest of the world have been turned upon us. And in fact, 4 years ago in the election of 2016, my husband and I had voted and we were traveling in South Africa at that time and talking to people and listening to people about their expectations of the United States, their disappointment then, their concerns then, and watching those concerns be fed over the past 4 years, we think that one of the most important things that has to happen, one of the first things that has to happen, and something that I'm sure the president-elect will focus on, is building those relationships such that the rest of the world understands that the United States is a good and reliable partner and friend to our allies. We understand that damage has been done to those relationships, and that's something that I'm sure he'll move very quickly to address. And even as we focus on and have to address the challenges that exist inside the United States.
Mélodie Barns, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.